Oh, you think you still belong here? You're no longer family. She doesn't even deserve a place at this table. Move her chair away. I won't waste a single dollar on excuses. I won't fund failures. This is a family dinner, not a charity event. Leave now, before dessert.
I kept my hands flat and breathed once. Stay, the notarized addendum will speak. The projector hummed above us like a tired ceiling fan. Stay, let the notarized addendum speak. The reception hall murmured, then quieted as the microphone steadied. My mother held it like a trophy, chin lifted, smile rehearsed. A cousin dragged my chair 3 feet. The white linen napkin cooled my palms. I stayed seated and counted one slow breath. They framed it as generosity. We redirected the family trust toward real entrepreneurship, my father said. He meant my brother's startup where branding mattered more than breath. I count breaths for a living. I'm a respiratory therapist. People live through 10 steady seconds. Clinks ran along the table like small hammers. The air vent whirred above the frosted cake. My brother lifted a flute and avoided my eyes. Some guests studied their roles as if bread needed chaperones. Proof waited in my purse, quiet as a folded bird. On a small USB were scans I made for Grandpa Walter last month. Will. Addendum. A revocation of a power of attorney with a courthouse timestamp. Receipts for copays. The insurance stalled. You keep time without fuss, he said. I won't have her freeload, my mother added, lighter voice, sharper blade. I looked at my water glass and counted another breath. In through my nose for 4, out for 6. The tablecloth had a thread pulled loose. I pinched the napkin edge and let it cool my fingers. My hands were steady like the mask straps I fasten in emergencies. Community hall lights buzzed softly. Flags waited in the corner. I rested my purse against my shin. If they push tonight, the paper speaks tomorrow. My chest tightened, then opened like a valve. I'll stay for coffee, I said. My father loved stages. He explained decisions like bullet points on a slide. We support excellence, he told the room, not me. We reward courage and ambition. A volunteer rolled in another urn. The coffee percolator burped and filled the room with a friendly smell. A woman I didn't know squeezed my shoulder. Uncle Morris watched from a far table, silent and even. He didn't rise. He looked at the head table and then at his notes. His patience put a small weight on the room. The effect was louder than a speech. I thought about the afternoon sun sliding across Grandpa's drapes. He traced lines with one finger and read titles twice. Words matter most when witnessed, he said, tapping the margin. At his desk the lamp pooled light like warm honey on legal paper. The stamp pad smelled faintly of ink and old envelopes. He made me read clauses slowly, then say them plain. I practiced until the sentences felt like steady hallway steps. He smiled when my voice landed without wobble or rush. My brother cleared his throat like a cue. We've offered her options, he said, to no one in particular. He meant a path toward the door. My relocated chair sighed as if it had learned manners. Say thank you, my mother said, performing kindness like arithmetic. Ava, say you understand. I heard you, I said. My voice stayed level like when I count breaths. The glass was colder than it looked. A thin bite of Lysol drifted from the hallway. We're moving forward as a family, my father announced. Please respect the decision. Some guests clapped as if clapping could glue a broken plate. The microphone squealed, then calmed like it understood its role. I remembered Grandpa asking me to read the bold line on the addendum. He tapped it with a slow knuckle. Respect clause. Public humiliation of any heir or coercion regarding gifts reduces the offender's share by 100%. He said law can be a door, but manners are the hinges. I didn't argue. I smoothed the napkin and left the pulled thread alone. My jaw loosened. A red exit sign glowed across the wall. My shadow leaned toward it and then straightened. Don't make this a scene, my father said, lower voice close enough to smell aftershave. You can step out quietly. Not leaving, I said. I'm staying for dessert. You won't be served, my mother said. Staff have instructions. I heard your instructions, I said. I placed the napkin over my lap and centered it. My hands kept their calm like a hallway clock. The DJ raised the music a little, a polite screen. People returned to forks and phones. I touched the purse zipper and didn't open it. The USB rested beside a small envelope with Walter written in blue ink. Paper lives with paper, he'd say. Proof likes company. Two cousins circled pretending to check centerpieces. One whispered, "I'm sorry," to the space near my elbow. I nodded once. I don't collect apologies like charms. I collect dates and signatures. A server announced coffee service in the lobby. Chairs scraped. The room exhaled. I stood, then sat again. I wanted their final line to land exactly as spoken. My mother turned the mic off but kept holding it. She mouthed, handled toward my father. He looked at Morris, then away. The projector cooled. The room held its breath and then released it. The hall cooled as people moved, leaving plates and perfumes behind. My breath found an ordinary pace, the one I use on night shifts. I thought about boundaries written down, not shouted, in rooms like this. A signed line travels farther than perfect posture and practiced smiles. Tonight I would trade every speech for one clear sentence. Outside rain tapped the awning in careful dots. I memorized the chair's new angle and the napkin's edge against my wrist. I noted the time on my phone. "Need a ride?" a friend texted. I typed back, "I'm good. I'll walk. Thank you." I waited beneath the exit sign until the hum settled into silence. Somewhere a door latch clicked, small and final as a period. My phone vibrated once, then quieted like a held breath. Rain braided down softly. The purse pressed my side like a small breathing animal. "Want the paper to speak? Keep listening." Chapter 2 reads the clause. I went to work anyway, even after that public scene. "You should have called in," someone said, watching me park. I needed the shift. I needed quiet control more. I needed the calm that outlasts microphones and glittering rooms. The reception noise still rang behind my ribs like a thin bell. In the hospital lot, damp air cooled my face and hands. I palmed the purse with the USB and followed painted arrows. The automatic doors breathed once and admitted me with a practiced sigh. ICU monitors clicked softly beneath the steady air vent were overhead. The nurse station smelled gently of coffee and opened antiseptic pads. I signed in, clipped my badge, and counted 4 deliberate breaths. Calm is a tool when people borrow hours from patient machines. ICU hallway lights steady across off-white tile and polished rails. I adjusted a mask strap and rechecked a trembling oxygen line. If panic rises, numbers teach lungs a steadier, teachable story. My shoulders lowered. Confidence returned to match the counted rhythm. "Breathe with me. 4 in, 6 out," I told the patient. "Rough night?" Tina asked, rolling a cart gently beside me. "You look carved from ice, but your hands never shake." Family dinner became a stage and I was the lesson. I touched the handle. It felt colder than polished chrome. Fluorescence hummed above us like a patient finally sleeping through alarms. "You okay?" she asked, keeping her voice low for the hallway. "I will be," I said, and I brought proof if needed. A monitor chimed once, then settled into obedience like a metronome. I steadied a mask and matched the patient's count without theatrics. My parents love flourish more than facts or quiet competence. I used to chase their tempo and miss every sensible exit. Eventually I chose rails instead of wheels and my pace changed. Grandpa Walter laid papers like track and named useful distances. "Words need witnesses," he'd say, tapping margins until I finally smiled. The stamp pads smelled like ink and rain drying across cardboard. Between patients I refilled humidifiers and checked vents and filters. The break room fridge hummed. The table felt slightly sticky from orange juice. I answered a cousin's message with 2 words that fit: "I'm steady." "Your folks again?" she asked, easing into the plastic chair. "They made it public," I said. "They belittled my work on microphone." The words tasted metallic, then dissolved into ordinary recycled air. I rinsed my cup and wiped the counter with small circles. "You want company later?" she asked. "I can bring lo mein." "Kind offer," I said. "There's a reading at my grandfather's tonight." "A reading like church?" she asked, curious despite herself. "A will reading," I said. "Uncle Morris favors procedures over speeches." She squeezed my forearm, warm fingers, anchoring calm against cooled skin. The hallway clock ticked steadily like a nag that never exhausted itself. "Your brother?" she asked, careful not to force any answer. He raised a glass, then lowered his eyes to the table. "A respiratory therapist keeps a simple faith about bodies and breath. Lungs prefer honesty, water and time, not applause or glitter." In rooms with alarms, truth is measured and kindly recorded. I choose measured because measured keeps people breathing beside us. My phone buzzed once with a vibration like a quiet throat clear. Call when free, uncle wrote using periods like signposts. I stepped by the vending machines, their lights glowing like stubborn promises. 2 minutes, I texted, then dialed with my back to the bustle. He answered on the second ring, voice even and balanced as a level. You will want the timing, he said. 7 sharp, living room. Thank you, I said, grateful for sentences that carried weight and mercy. Should I bring the documents you remember and the scans I made? Bring whatever com you used last month while we organized pages. The addendum remains filed where you placed it. Your scans match. An elevator dinged somewhere, cheerful and thoughtless in its punctuality. I pictured Walter's mantel clock catching a square of afternoon Sunday. Any surprises I should expect? I asked, bracing without stiffening. Only human ones, he said, and witnesses saw tonight's performance. Okay, I said, I will arrive early and park along the hedge. Good, he said, we are not a court. Dress however feels honest. I pocketed the phone and rolled my shoulders to find my center. The closet handle felt cool. Lysol kept the hallway politely clean. The USB pressed the purse like a folded wing against fabric lining. Beside it, an envelope labeled Walter in blue ink balanced gently. I slid both into the side pocket and zipped once satisfied. An alarm chirped and faded when I stepped into room 12. The monitor reported numbers like a calm, detail-obsessed accountant. You're okay, I said. We watch and help and we stay. I remembered Walter breathing thin and stubborn across one brittle winter. He hated asking for help. He loved getting procedures exactly right. I paid a copay when insurance lagged again and apologized later. Receipts are tiny paper prayers, he said, stacking them with care. I stored them together, facing the same way, corners squared and steady. Near shift's end, the vents made a long, comforting rush overhead. I charted progress and checked oxygen tanks twice before returning keys. I clocked out and stepped into evening that smelled like wet pavement. Streetlights found puddles and painted thin gold lines across asphalt. I placed the purse on the seat and texted one word: driving. Wipers sketched slow arcs as the rain returned to finish sentences. I counted documents like pins on a map. I trusted completely. Well, then addendum, then a POA revocation stamped at courthouse. Receipts for copays paid by card and cash stacked neatly by date. I parked outside the house where Walter taught patience and proof. The porch light warmed the damp like a practiced, steady guiding hand. I would sit where he sat and let the paper hold the room. Dignity prefers clear dates over speeches and titles without signatures. Inside, the mantel clock would tick whether or not we respected it. Tonight we would respect it and ourselves in front of witnesses together and keep breathing. I'm not leaving. Then don't make trouble. I won't. Your pride is showing. The reception thinned but kept breathing. Music softened like an apology. Chairs scraped against cinder block. I stood by the lobby doorway and kept my hands flat. The microphone's ghost buzz lingered under the music's polite surface. My fingers read the cup seam like braille for patience. 2 ants arranged programs. You're provoking her, one said. Leave before people talk. I counted 4 in and 6 out. My mother watched me like an usher eyeing a latecomer. My father conferred with the DJ, eyes quartering the room. I faced the coffee urn and its calm chrome curve. Someone will escort you, a cousin murmured. No one needs a scene. There's no scene, I said. I'll finish coffee and walk out. The urn hissed once, then rested. I poured a cup and held the heat. The paper sleeve bit pleasantly. The edge warmed my fingertips. Uncle Morris approached with the patient step of a courthouse hallway. He didn't touch me or look at the stage. Are you all right? He asked, voice low for napkins. I am steady, I said. Thank you for asking directly. We're on for tonight, he said. 7 o'clock, living room. Understood, I said. I'll arrive early. He said, do not argue here. Witnesses heard enough. We stood while the air vent whispered across the lobby. Fluorescent panels hummed. The air tasted faintly of old coffee. The flag's fringe brushed the stand and whispered like paper corners. I slid my purse strap higher and tasted dark roast. My mother's heels tapped a warning as she crossed the hall. She didn't smile, the picture had smudged. Are you finished? She asked. Guests need thanks and you're lingering to sulk. I'm finishing coffee, I said. Then I'll go. Go now, she said, or someone will help you follow the schedule. Threats require oxygen, I said. I won't feed them in public. The lobby softened. She leaned closer, perfume turning sweet into sharp. We made a decision, she said. Respect it like an adult. I heard your microphone, I said. I'm behaving like an adult. My father joined us, smile restored for whoever still watched. He spread his fingers, showing rented calm. We don't want friction, he said. Please exit smoothly. Exiting smoothly, I said after one last sip. Your career isn't sustainable, he added. Consider training that pays returns. People breathe because of my training, I said, level and ordinary. Returns are a chest rising without struggle. I set the cup down and traced the cardboard seam. Then I squared my shoulders, simple as folding a blanket. Community hall lobby fluorescence resting pale along scuffed tile. I slid my chair back to its original place by the table. If they lie tomorrow, the time-stamped clause will steady the room. My chest tightened, then released. The napkin cooled my fingers. Count your blessings, she said. Count the witnesses, I answered. The lobby exhaled and survived another cue. I inhaled slowly and let the coffee settle. Aunt June's bracelet clinked. She kept her eyes elsewhere. Apologize and we'll reconsider Christmas, my mother said, almost pleasant. That clock is loud, I said, thinking of Walter's mantle. She frowned, missing the point by a mile. The projector fan wound down and stopped. She tried a softer line. You embarrass yourself resisting guidance. My resistance is silence, I said. You embarrassed me for sport. A server passed with plates, steam rose and disappeared. Roast chicken met the faint bite of bleach. Stop talking in riddles, my father said. Stop staging morality plays, I said. Write your terms. His jaw flexed, he counted something besides breaths. I lifted my purse and felt the USB press a small square. A laugh bounced from the doorway and fell flat. My brother stood there, fingers around a glass, eyes fogged. Don't ruin their night, he said, halfway plea, halfway pose. Their night doesn't require my disappearance. I said kindly enough. Let's be efficient, he said. Let's move you along. Efficiency suits machines, I said. I prefer documented fairness. The coffee urn hissed and released a gentle ghost. I stepped toward the door and the cooler air. The purse strap cut a mild line across my shoulder. The exit sign glowed warm and certain above us. Tonight changes nothing, my mother said, reclaiming prophecy. Tonight changes everything, I said, because dates beat speeches. You're dramatic, she said. I'm precise, I said, and walked toward the weather. Outside, the rain paused but left the awning damp. Parking lot lights made little coins from puddles. The door behind me shut and clipped the evening into 2 rooms. Rain resumed softly, stitching the awning with tiny silver threads. The fabric cooled my knuckles and steadied the shake that threatened. Do you need help? A server asked, trays balanced. I'm fine, I said. Thank you for the kindness. They were harsh, she said. I hated hearing it. You were doing real work, I said. That matters. I crossed the lot and skimmed my hand along the cool car door. I opened the door and felt the interior's faint warmth. Rain and coffee mixed with old paper in the purse. I sat with hands on the wheel, engine off, cabin friendly. Headlights flared across wet asphalt and painted brief ladders of light. The cabin smelled of clean upholstery and the purse's envelope glue. I closed my eyes and saw Walter's lamp, soft and patient. He filed the addendum where a careful person would. He liked clauses to sing plainly without thunder. I wiped a circle and considered the road ahead. The route felt like a sentence I knew by heart. The turns would arrive on schedule, measured and calm. I started the car and let the engine settle. The purse sat upright like a quiet passenger. My shoulders placed themselves where professionals keep them. At the street, I checked mirrors with unhurried precision. I turned left and let the radio tower slide behind. The town grew gentle like a hallway after visiting hours. Street lamps cast halos on wet pavement and invited careful driving. I exhaled and let the wheels straighten through the curve. I rehearsed phrases for tonight. Read the line, please. Note the date, please. Witnesses heard the insult. The words measured cleanly and didn't wobble. When I turned onto Walter's Road, the world quieted. Gravel spoke under tires like typed periods. Cottage windows held warm rectangles despite the weather. I parked under the hedge and killed the engine. I unlatched the seatbelt and felt the click settle nerves. I lifted the purse and confirmed the envelope's weight. I stood beside the car and listened to crickets. Crickets filed quiet minutes outside. My shoes found the path Walter swept on Saturdays. The porch boards remembered footsteps and gave a friendly creak. I raised my hand to knock and then opened the door. The cottage smelled of fresh coffee and rain-soaked wood. I stepped from the porch into Walter's living room, purse heavy against my side. The mantel clock ticked softer than the reception's microphone, yet more certain. Family voices blended into low murmurs beneath the ceiling's wooden beams. My mother sat rigid on the sofa, pearls aligned with intention. My father leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, tapping a polished shoe. My brother scrolled his phone, the blue light shielding him. Aunts and cousins filled corners, watching for someone else to set the tone. I chose the far chair by the window. The drapes glowed faintly from a street lamp outside, drops still clinging to glass. I set the purse across my lap, hands flat, eyes lowered. The zipper pressed steady lines against my palm. Doubt crept in despite every clause I had scanned. Could paper silence voices trained to control a stage? Would witnesses admit what they heard at the reception? Could Walter's words restrain my parents' performance? My chest lifted once, caught, then lowered again. Stillness was safer than answers. Uncle Morris cleared his throat at the table. He stacked folders, corners aligned, weight undeniable. "We begin when the clock strikes," he said, voice even. "Procedure matters, time matters. Your father believed so." The mantel answered with one patient tick. No one argued with sound. My mother turned to him, smile restored. "Morris, surely we can move quickly. Guests have lives beyond papers." He shook his head gently. "Lives bend on papers, not beyond them. We respect his order." My father muttered about theatrics and looked away. The air vent whirred, once carrying the faint bite of Lysol from the hallway. My cousin June coughed into her sleeve, then whispered to her sister. I tapped the purse edge, 1, 2, 3. Proof weighed more than posture, but patience must hold until the page turned. The envelope inside felt like a stone wrapped in cloth. My thumb traced its corner through the lining. Walter's ink rested there, blue and deliberate, his voice folded into paper. He trusted me to scan, to file, to carry. That responsibility pressed heavier than the pearls my mother wore. Uncle Morris adjusted his glasses. "Tonight is not about speeches," he said. "We read, we note, we respect. No exceptions." He placed a single sheet aside. "When the mantle strikes 7, we proceed. Until then, we hold silence." The mantle ticked toward the hour, each click measured. My brother looked up briefly. "This is unnecessary. Dad already explained the trust." He gestured toward my parents. "Why waste time with relics?" Uncle Morris didn't answer. He let the clock speak. Refusal echoed louder than a speech. My brother sank back into his screen. I exhaled slowly. Doubt shifted toward readiness. Walter's words would face theirs in the only arena that counted, written record, signed and sealed. The room didn't need my defense, it needed my silence. I pressed the purse, reassured by its weight. The coffee pot burbled in the kitchen, steam curling into the air. A cousin carried mugs, hands trembling, eyes avoiding mine. She placed one near me. I wrapped my fingers around the ceramic and felt warmth spread steady. The rim was smooth, unlike the jagged words from the reception. "She looks too comfortable," my mother whispered, though not quietly enough. My father leaned toward her, muttering approval. I sipped, letting the heat mark time. The mantle ticked, impartial. Rain tapped glass, impartial. Both bore better witness than family pride. Walter's portrait watched from the wall, uniform, neat, eyes steady. He had lived through louder rooms and harsher denials. He chose clauses over speeches, margins over shouting. His gaze steadied me. "You trusted me with your words," I thought. "I will let them breathe." Uncle Morris lifted another folder. The papers rasped, dry and confident. "In 5 minutes," he said. "Respect the silence or respect the door." No one moved. Even my parents, masters of stagecraft, obeyed the tick. The room folded into quiet like lungs before a first breath. I studied the drapes as the lamp's glow dimmed slightly. The fabric smelled faintly of rain and wool. My fingers tapped the mug. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm matched the clock, matched my heart, matched the envelope square. Fear pressed again. What if the addendum failed? What if witnesses faltered? What if silence broke before the record? I steadied myself. Walter prepared well. He trusted procedure more than applause. His plan was ink, not performance. The mantle struck 7. The sound filled the cottage, clean and undeniable. Uncle Morris rose, lifted the folder and spoke. "We begin now." Papers waited steady as lungs before a first breath. My purse felt lighter. The weight moved to the table. The room leaned forward as he touched the seal. Doubt lingered, but order had begun. The reading would speak soon, louder than pearls or polished shoes. I folded my hands and held silence as my last defense. The lamp pooled warm light across the table's varnished surface. Uncle Morris aligned 3 folders in front of him, corners squared with careful precision. The mantel clock ticked once, then held its rhythm steady. Rain tapped faintly against the window panes, carrying the smell of damp wood into the room. He lifted the first folder and spread it flat. Paper rasped as he turned the cover, exposing the title page. The heading was centered, Walter's full name printed in letters sharp and unbroken. The air vent whispered once overhead, steady as lungs on a calm monitor. "We will begin with the will," Morris said, voice level. "Afterward, an addendum will follow. Finally, certain supporting records will be entered." He raised his eyes and let silence hold for a moment. No one shifted, though my brother thumbed his phone before setting it aside. I pressed my palms against the purse in my lap. The envelope inside felt like a stone waiting for daylight. I pictured Walter leaning at his desk, tapping the margin with a calm finger. He had repeated again and again, "Words matter more than volume, signatures more than charm." Morris read slowly. "Last will and testament of Walter W. Keller. Executed last year, witnessed by 2 neighbors, notarized the same day." My mother leaned forward, pearls set in their practiced order. My father adjusted his tie, expression rehearsed into confidence. The mantle ticked again, impartial as always. "Outline only," Morris continued. "Specific bequests, then residue directed to a family trust." His pen tapped twice on the margin, a metronome of attention. "Trustees shall distribute according to attached schedule unless modified by addendum." He let the phrase rest before turning the page. My father offered a polite nod as if endorsing his own conclusion. "The schedule reflects our guidance," he said. His tone carried performance more than truth. Morris lifted a hand and let the silence answer. "We will read every section before judgments," he said. "The document, not the assumption, speaks." Dust drifted across the lamplight like small dancers. I followed each particle until it disappeared into shadows along the ceiling beam. The mug beside me released a faint curl of steam, coffee scent mixing with the tang of Lysol from the hallway. I sipped once, letting warmth steady my breath. Morris paused to explain. "A will may be amended or revoked by written addendum." He placed a finger against the margin. "Fact box will. A will is a signed document that directs property after death." He closed the first folder with care and reached for the second. The addendum rested inside a sealed envelope, Walter's initials marked in blue across the flap. The crease was familiar, identical to the one I helped him fold on his desk. He had asked me to scan both sides, check the notary stamp, confirm the signatures twice. I remembered his voice. "Do not trust memory, trust ink." My brother leaned forward. "Is this really necessary?" The trust was already explained. His voice reached for certainty but landed short. Morris glanced at the mantel clock, then back at the envelope. "Every page will be opened," he said. "Nothing skipped, nothing rushed." The blade of a silver opener gleamed briefly in lamplight. Paper fibers gave way with a crisp rasp. He slid the sheet out and laid it beside the will. "You will note the stamp in the lower corner," he said, tapping the inked circle. "Also 2 witness signatures, clear and repeated." He passed the document around the circle, each relative leaning closer to trace the dates. My mother smiled, pearls catching light. "Such ceremony," she said. "Your father loved appearances that projected dignity." I swallowed and kept my voice even. "He loved witnesses more than ceremony." He said, "Dignity is proven in writing, not in microphones." The words landed without echo, but Morris's eyes softened in brief agreement. He found the paragraph midway down the page. "Respect clause," he announced, voice firmer than before. "In the event any heir publicly humiliates another heir or coerces changes to gifts that heir's share shall be reduced by 100%, redistributed accordingly." The syllables did not hurry. They settled into the wood like nails. The room froze. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's smile faltered. A cousin shifted her cup and clinked porcelain against saucer. The mantel clock ticked, marking each beat as witness. My breath caught, then steadied. Proof had spoken, and it had done so in Walter's deliberate tone. Morris let the silence breathe. Then he paraphrased, ensuring no one misunderstood. Any heir who humiliates or pressures loses their share completely. Redistribution will follow the records of consistent care. He looked around the circle and paused at me. He did not linger, only confirmed the line had weight. I remembered the reception's microphone squeal, my chair dragged aside, my mother's words sharp as glass. The humiliation was no longer rumor, it was on record. Witnesses sat in this very room. The respect clause had teeth, and every relative understood where they pointed. My brother tried to recover. It can't apply. That wasn't coercion, only truth spoken plainly. June's bracelet clinked as she folded her arms. It was plain, she whispered, plain as cruelty. She did not raise her eyes, but the air confirmed her testimony. My father shifted again, this time without confidence. Morris pressed the page flat. The clause stands, he said. Tonight's record carries forward. He reached for the third folder, the one holding supporting evidence. We must confirm who acted as consistent caregiver by record. His voice did not rise, but it filled the room with quiet gravity. He lifted receipts clipped together, each stamped and dated. Medical copays paid on time. Scans prepared last month. He turned one slip toward the lamplight. The numbers showed payments cleared from my account. He read dates aloud, his tone matter of fact. FACTBOX receipt. A receipt is proof of payment stamped with date and amount. My mother shifted pearls, clicking faintly. She did that for appearance, she muttered. To earn sympathy. I pressed my hands harder on the purse. Insurance lagged, I said. Grandpa asked me to cover until claims processed. My voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. The dates spoke. Morris placed the receipts beside the addendum. He reached again and held up a single bank memo. Wire transfer of $28 medical copay March. Same account. Same signature. He slid it across the table, his fingertips steady. Factbox wire memo. A wire memo is a bank record confirming transfer of funds. The room breathed differently now. The scent of coffee grew sharper, or perhaps nerves sharpened it. My chest opened with relief, then restrained itself. This was not victory yet. It was evidence laid in sequence, no more and no less. Morris closed the folder with care. We will continue tomorrow evening with property transfers, he said. For tonight this clause has been read into record. The mantel ticked firm as ever. The cottage walls seemed to lean closer, recognizing that order had replaced rumor. I exhaled slowly, hands still resting on the purse. Walter's voice echoed inside me, let paper do the heavy lifting. I had done my part, scanning, filing, showing up. The rest belonged to the ink, to the dates, to the signatures lined in order. The lamp hummed faintly, a filament keeping steady glow. Outside rain softened against the porch roof, tapping slower than before. I traced the mug handle one last time, warmth nearly gone but still present. My silence held, and the documents carried what needed carrying. The lamp's circles steadied the table. Uncle Morris kept one palm on the addendum, anchoring the room by touch. The mantel clock ticked, measuring breaths. Rain thinned, the porch held hush. He reopened the supporting folder and flattened a second set of records. We will confirm timeline and independence, he said, voice measured and calm. A paperclip clicked free, dates lined up. The scent of coffee lingered under the air vent's steady whisper. These are the scans made last month, he continued. Each bears a timestamp. His finger landed on a corner with crisp digits. Any objection to authenticity, he asked. My mother exhaled. My father said nothing, but his shoe kept time. Morris held up the earlier power of attorney revocation. The seal shone under the lamp. Revoked on May 10th, he read. Filed same day, clerk countersigned. He slid the page beside the will. I remembered Walter steadying the form before he tapped the margin. He disliked flourish, loved clarity, insisted on witnesses. He asked me to bring the notary's card. I placed it on the blotter face up. My brother leaned back, performing boredom. He didn't need revocation, he said. Dad wasn't pushing anything unfair. June's bracelet clicked once. No one defended the reception's microphone moment. Morris stayed calm. The revocation predates this dispute by several months. He paused. Factbox POA revocation. A signed notice canceling prior authority, dated and filed. He placed a second sheet near the first. Transfer on death designation for the cottage, he said. Beneficiary named. He read the line and paraphrased. Upon death, title passes to the named person automatically. My mother adjusted her pearls. Documents can be misread, she said. Context gets complicated during grief. Morris nodded without ceding ground. Context matters, he said. Signatures and dates carry it between rooms. He lifted the deed page and turned it toward the lamp. I watched inked letters turn sure as street signs. Corners initialed, margins clean stamped dark. My chest eased a fraction, then remembered caution. Paper is strong, but some treat it like curtains. Morris marked the date with a star. We verify parcel number tomorrow with the registry, he said. Tonight we confirm intent, timing, independence. He straightened the stack. He looked at me. Ava, did you observe Walter signing the TOD form? I kept my voice steady. I observed initials on corners and one signature, I said. The notary read identification and checked expiration. Any pressure from you or others, he asked. None, I said. He set the appointment and handed me the folder. My mother inhaled to object, then didn't. The mantle ticked, unsentimental. Morris turned to the wire memo and receipts. Next, caregiver evidence, he said. Copays paid during insurance lag. He read dates aloud. The bank slip reflected the transfer like a small mirror. Appearance of generosity can be performative, my father said carefully. People pay small bills to influence estates. He sounded rehearsed. I kept eyes on the table, answering softly. People breathe because someone keeps oxygen flowing during delays. My brother tried another angle. She wants the cottage, he said. That's the game. I traced the mug handle, then let it go. I want respect to travel as Walter intended, I said. By dates, signatures, and the truth we all heard. Community living room lamp above stacked forms. I placed receipts and memo in one neat row. If their voices rise, timestamps will hold the floor. My hands cooled against the table. My breath found level. Please read the clause one more time, I said. Morris returned to the addendum and traced the paragraph. Respect clause, he read, then paused for the room. Public humiliation or coercion results in forfeiture and redistribution. He didn't sweeten it. The sentence kept its spine. He looked toward my parents, then released silence. My mother tried the softest smile. No humiliation occurred, she said. We made an announcement for clarity. June's bracelet sounded again, bright as a bell. She was told to leave, June said. We all saw it happen. She didn't lift her eyes. We do not adjudicate tone here, Morris said. We read and record. He wrote a line on a legal pad and underlined. Witnesses present acknowledge a public statement removing Ava from family. He set the pencil down and moved a paperweight. My father leaned forward, elbows polished by habit. Walter wanted decorum, he said. He would hate this atmosphere. Morris answered quietly. Walter wanted written dignity, he said. We are honoring it line by line. The rain paused. My brother returned to outcome. What happens to their shares, he asked. The clause is punitive, my mother added. It feels vindictive. Morris shook his head. It is protective, he said. It safeguards dignity and deters the behavior. He read the redistribution instruction. Shares reduced to 0 are reallocated to the most consistent caregiver by record. His eyes didn't linger on me, but the line did. A cousin shifted, then stilled. The mantle ticked. My stomach lifted, then found ground. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat. I folded my hands and thought about tightened mask straps. The windows held lamplight. Outside, wet wood scented the porch. My mother tried again. We apologized privately, she said. Emotions ran high. Morris tilted his head. The clause references public denigration on record, he said. Private regret doesn't erase a microphone. His words were gentle and final. My father reached for an older script. We invested in the boy, he said. That required reallocation. He nodded toward my brother. I met the table's edge with calm fingers. Tonight is respect, not venture funding, I said. Morris slid the TOD page back atop the stack. We schedule registry confirmation tomorrow, he said. Attendance optional. He returned the addendum to a sleeve and locked it. The click sounded like a latch meeting weather. He breathed once, preparing to close. 2 actions remain, he said. A request for acknowledgement and a proposal for apology. He folded a smaller sheet. We will hear brief statements, then note conditions for peace. My mother straightened, hunting for a podium. We value family, she began. The public remark was unfortunate. Her voice slipped. My father added, we regret the phrasing. He didn't name the act, only the grammar. I looked at the lamplight and kept my shoulders square. I accept an apology that lives on paper, I said. With terms. My tone stayed clinical. The room waited, testing whether mercy was weakness or design. Morris uncapped his pen. State the terms, he said. He made the request plainly. No disparagement written or spoken at family events, I said. No interference with work or housing decisions. I paused. Boundaries in writing signed. He wrote each line, then read them back. No gloating language, I added. We finish with dignity. His mouth lifted slightly. Agreed, he said. Dignity belongs to the outcome, not the noise. My brother rolled a shoulder. This is dramatic, he said. A misunderstanding, June answered before I could. It was clear, she said. We stood there, her bracelet settled with a final clink. The room did not disagree. Morris placed the apology sheet beside the addendum. We will deliver this with the summary, he said. Signatures tomorrow. He closed the master folder and set the paperweight. The mantle ticked. The room softened around the sound. The coffee had cooled, but its smell remained. I lifted the mug and let the ceramic ground my hand. Outside tires sang briefly on wet pavement. The living room kept calm and the documents kept order. Morris faced my parents and spoke evenly. Acknowledgement now, please, he said. Ava was publicly humiliated at the reception. My mother's eyes met mine, then slid away. That happened, she said. My father followed. It happened, he said, and stopped. A small wind moved under the door. The drapes lifted a fraction, then rested against the glass. Relief didn't rush. The porch light steadied and the clock resumed ordinary attention. Morris set tomorrow's time for signatures and registry review. He stacked the folders and locked them in Walter's case. We adjourn, he said. Thank you for your patience. The room released its breath without applause. I rose and gathered my purse, lighter than it had for weeks. Walter's portrait held its silence. I looked at the lamp, the pen, and the closed case. The cottage smelled of damp wood and a lesson finally in writing. On the porch the night settled into calm after argument. Crickets marked minutes, the steps remembered careful descent. My shoes found the path. The hedge shook off one last bead of rain. Tomorrow would carry signatures and stamps. I touched the railing and thanked the wood for holding steady. My phone buzzed once with a question mark from a friend. I typed, okay, then added, paper spoke. I slid the phone away and breathed a level count to 4. Behind me the door eased shut, respectful as a librarian. I walked to the car under a sky interested in quiet. The engine turned once. I steered toward morning and the registry's open door. The night air cooled my face the moment I left the cottage. The scent of wet leaves mixed with wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. I held the purse against my side, lighter now, though the papers still carried their own weight. Crickets kept time in the hedges, steady and indifferent to family politics. I reached the car and leaned briefly against the door. The metal chilled my arm through the sleeve. My breath found a slower rhythm, though my chest still remembered the tightness from the table. Proof had spoken, yet unease lived alongside relief. Documents can hold a room, but relatives rarely leave quietly. Inside the car, I sat without starting the engine. The steering wheel leather smelled faintly of sun and dust. I let my hands rest, feeling each ridge along the stitching. Tonight paper anchored dignity, but tomorrow carried tasks, signatures, registry checks, another confrontation waiting in daylight. My shoulders lowered, though not fully. Headlights swept across the lane as another car passed. The glow faded, leaving the cottage windows lit like small lanterns. I thought of Walter's portrait watching us, eyes fixed on margins and signatures. He believed clauses could tame tempers. I wanted to believe it too. Still, my parents' faces carried more calculation than regret. I started the car and guided it slowly down the gravel. Stones cracked under tires, a simple percussion. Each crunch reminded me that paths are shaped by weight. At the stop sign I lingered longer than needed. My phone buzzed once with a new message. "You okay?" a colleague asked. I typed back, "Steady." Long night. The main road stretched ahead, glistening from rain. Street lamps cast round halos, each one humming faintly. My wipers squeaked once, then rested. I followed the lines as if they were clauses in sequence, each carrying me toward morning. The purse shifted on the seat and pressed against me like a passenger. A question grew: how far do boundaries extend? Tonight I insisted on written apology signatures, no gloating. But signatures fade if people treat them as props. Should I enforce them beyond tonight, even if that means colder distance? The thought pulled at me like a mask strapped too tight. I pulled into my apartment lot and sat with the engine off. Porch lights blinked across the building, steady and ordinary. I carried the purse upstairs and set it gently on the table. The zipper teeth glimmered under lamplight. I brewed tea, steam rising in small spirals, scent of chamomile cutting through the rain. Sitting at the kitchen table, I laid out the mug and nothing else. I resisted the urge to open the purse again. Rereading the documents tonight would not change their lines. What mattered was the choice ahead, whether I would accept the apology at face value or hold terms like a guardrail forever. I closed my eyes and pictured the reception again. My chair dragged aside, microphone squealing, pearls flashing. Those images will not fade soon. Yet Walter's handwriting also played in my mind, each letter deliberate. Respect, he had written. Without it no share stands. His claws had teeth, but his letter carried warmth. The tea cooled. I carried the mug to the sink and rinsed it clean. Water rushed, echoing against porcelain, then stilled. I dried my hands on a towel and listened to the building settle. Pipes clicked once, then rested. My apartment's ordinary noises felt like allies compared to family voices. Sleep came in pieces. I turned, then lay still, counting breaths. 4 in, 6 out, just as I tell patients. At dawn, light pressed through blinds in thin gray bands. I rose, dressed, and set the purse back on the passenger seat. The documents rode with me again, silent companions. At work, monitors beeped softly, IV pumps hissed in rhythm. My hands adjusted straps and guided breathing. I charted carefully, each line clear, no flourish. A patient whispered thanks before drifting into sleep. That word carried more weight than any apology rehearsed at a table. It steadied me until break. In the staff lounge, Tina raised an eyebrow. "You look like you fought the weather." I smiled faintly. "Family, not weather." She poured coffee, steam filling the small room. "Did the papers hold?" she asked. I nodded. They held. But holding once isn't the same as holding forever. She touched my arm. "Boundaries aren't one night. They're practice." Her words reminded me of Walter's insistence on repetition. Date, signature, witness. Then again. I finished my coffee and promised myself I would not drift into doubt alone. Tomorrow's registry would either harden the boundary or test it further. The shift passed. Evening arrived with rain tapping windows again. I drove home slowly, lights gleaming on wet asphalt. In the apartment, I set the purse on the counter. I didn't unzip it, but I kept my hand resting on it for a long moment. The paper's silence steadied me more than talk could. I walked to the window and opened the blinds. Across the street, a grocery sign buzzed neon, stuttering like a tired metronome. The smell of rain pushed through the screen. I leaned on the sill, cool metal against my wrists, and let the air move me toward steadiness. Later, I wrote a short note to myself on plain paper. Respect travels forward. I dated it, then slid it under the purse. A simple act, but it felt like practicing what Walter modeled. Records endure not because they shout, but because they stay. I wanted my own line to stay. The night quieted. My phone buzzed again, a message from June. "Registry tomorrow." I typed back, "Yes, 7. Her bracelet had clicked like truth the night before. Tomorrow her voice might be needed again. I placed the phone face down and let silence claim the room. Before bed, I opened the closet and hung my jacket carefully. The fabric smelled faintly of coffee and rain. I smoothed the sleeve once, then closed the door. My mind rehearsed tomorrow, pen uncapped, dates checked, signatures made. The ritual mattered more than the drama. Registry stamps leave less room for denial. I lay down, blanket drawn to my shoulders. My breath slowed with the ticking clock on the nightstand. Each second passed like a reminder. Order is built in small increments, not in bursts. My parents might resist, but the record will not. The record will be present, steady and unavoidable. Sleep carried me at last. I dreamed of Walter's cottage, mantle clock, steady lamp humming, drapes drawn. He tapped the margin once, then folded his hands. His silence told me everything. Let the paper carry weight, let your heart carry patience. The dream ended, but its instruction remained. Morning will test it. Registry doors will open, clerks will check numbers, and ink will meet ledgers. I will be there, purse in hand, ready to see boundaries written again. Relief and doubt will walk beside me, but proof will walk ahead. Tomorrow's clerk holds the stamp, and the stamp will not tremble. Morning arrived with a sky rinsed pale by last night's rain. I carried the purse to the car, straps creaking slightly under its weight. The air smelled of wet asphalt and faint coffee drifting from a neighbor's kitchen. My shoes tapped across the lot, each step deliberate, each one measured toward the registry. Traffic moved slowly along the county road. Streetlights blinked off one by one, surrendering to daylight. I kept both hands on the wheel, shoulders squared. The purse sat upright on the seat beside me, the envelope inside, pressing like a quiet heartbeat. I counted breaths the way I do for patients, 4 and 6 out. Calm needed rehearsal even on ordinary mornings that promised extraordinary proof. The registry building stood plain and rectangular, bricks darkened by moisture. A flag hung limp, wet from drizzle. I entered through double glass doors, hinges groaned slightly. The lobby smelled of paper, toner, and faint Lysol. Clerks moved with practiced rhythm, pens tapping, stamps clicking. Each sound echoed authority without effort. Uncle Morris waved me toward a table near the counter. His folders rested neatly, corners squared. "Morning," he said, tone steady. "Today we verify." I nodded. June sat already, bracelet glinting as she folded her hands. My parents entered behind us, expressions tight, performance stripped by fluorescent light. The clerk approached with a stack of forms. Her glasses caught glare, her smile remained professional but detached. "Documents for verification," she said. Morris slid the revocation, the addendum, and the TOD page forward. The clerk adjusted them into a precise row. Her pen traced the margins, lips moving as she read. She stamped once, the sound firm as a gavel. "Revocation accepted. Authority rescinded May 10th. My father shifted in his chair, throat tightening. She stamped again. "Addendum notarized, witnesses valid. Respect clause stands." My mother's pearls trembled slightly against her blouse. The clerk stamped a third time. "Transfer on death form clear. Property title passes accordingly." Silence filled the lobby more powerfully than applause. June spoke softly, bracelet clinking. We all saw the humiliation. The clerk looked up, then back to the addendum. "Witness statement aligns with clause language," she said. Redistribution triggered. My parents stared at the floor. The mantel clock was not here yet. Time itself confirmed what they had denied. Morris exhaled and gathered the stamped pages. "We proceed with final reading at the cottage this evening," he said. "Attendance required." The clerk added a receipt slip to the stack. "Fact box, registry stamp. A clerk's imprint confirming official acceptance of filed documents." She placed it carefully on top, ink still drying. We left the building together, footsteps echoing on tile. Outside, clouds parted briefly, a ray brushing across wet pavement. My mother pulled her coat tighter. My father buttoned his jacket as if sewing dignity back on. I walked ahead, purse swinging lightly now that weight shifted into the public record. At the cottage that evening, chairs circled the table again. Walter's portrait remained steady on the wall, lamp humming over papers. Morris opened the final folder and laid out the letter of wishes sealed in Walter's handwriting. The room leaned toward him, anticipation bracing like wind before a storm. He broke the seal gently, folding the paper open. His voice slowed, carrying respect with each syllable. "To my family," he read, "this clause is not vengeance. It is reminder dignity survives only when respect is given freely." The words moved like a current, pulling silence into place. My father shifted, lips pressed thin. My mother blinked, mascara smudging faintly. Morris continued. "I direct that any portion removed under this clause be given to the one who demonstrated care with consistency. Records will show who that was." He paused, letting the line land. My breath steadied, heart slower than before. The lamp warmed the wood grain on the table. June's bracelet glinted again as she nodded once. The letter continued. "I ask that apology follow dignity, not erase it. Boundaries must be practiced. Speak without cruelty or remain silent." Morris lowered the page and folded his hands. The cottage itself seemed to breathe out. Community living room, lamplight steady. I placed my purse on the table and folded my hands atop it. If denial returned, the stamps would answer. My chest rose and fell in calm measure. My fingers cooled against leather. "Please read the last line," I said quietly. Morris nodded. "Final instruction: cottage remains with Ava Keller, caregiver by record, beneficiary by deed. May it be a place of peace, not performance." His tone did not falter. The room absorbed the words and knew them permanent. Authority had confirmed, now affection needed to follow. My parents spoke at last. My mother's voice thinned. "We acknowledge the record." My father added, "We acknowledge the redistribution." Neither protested, neither embraced. They folded into silence, and silence served as boundary better than false grace. The mantel clock ticked its agreement. Morris reached for the apology sheet drafted last night. "Signatures now," he said. He passed the pen, blue ink steady. My parents signed first, hands stiff but obedient. The sound of pen scratching felt like rails laid across years of contempt. June signed as witness, bracelet chiming softly. When the pen reached me, I signed with even strokes. I did not gloat. I did not falter. I wrote my name as I write orders at work, clear, unadorned, final. Morris collected the page, tapped it once, and placed it with the addendum. He closed the folder gently, and the latch clicked like a period. My brother slouched deeper in his chair. "So the cottage is hers," he muttered. No one answered. Silence itself corrected him more firmly than words. Walter's letter had promised peace, not argument. The drapes moved faintly with a draft sun on their edges, fading into evening. Morris stood. "The matter concludes." He faced my parents. "Boundaries are signed. Terms are fixed. Dignity is restored." He turned to me. "Keys transfer now." He placed the cottage keys in my palm. Metal pressed cool against my skin, edges familiar from Walter's desk drawer. My chest tightened with gratitude, then softened. I rose slowly, keys in one hand, purse strap in the other. "Thank you," I said. Not to my parents, not even to Morris, but to Walter's careful ink. His claws had spoken across time. His respect had traveled forward. The room carried its own hush of closure. The lamp hummed once more. The mantel clock ticked, impartial witness to signatures, stamps, and silence. Outside, rain began again, gentle rather than punishing. I walked to the window and touched the cool glass. My reflection looked steadier than it had in months. Paper had given me ground where words had failed. I turned back to the table. "I accept the cottage," I said. "And I accept the apology with terms." My mother lowered her eyes. My father adjusted his jacket. Neither challenged. That in itself was justice. Justice without shouting, justice without gloating, justice in writing. Morris gathered the folders, stacked them neatly, and closed the case. "Meeting adjourned," he said. Chairs scraped softly as relatives rose. No one clapped, no one sneered. The only sound was paper settling into order. Walter's portrait remained above us, dignified, unbothered, exact. I stepped onto the porch, keys warm now in my hand. Crickets resumed their rhythm and the hedge shook rain-free. My shoes met the path, wood creaked under my weight, and the air smelled of clean earth. Behind me the door shut, quietly respectful as any witness. Tonight's lesson is simple: respect endures when the record holds. To hear more voices finding strength through documents, subscribe to EN True Tales. Start with inheritance and elder dignity, and walk with families who claimed peace by ink and date.